Good afternoon. Well, it's a rainy, snowy day here in Oregon, and I thought I'd get some more of these done. We already covered some of the should case statements, catastrophizing cognitions, and I think what we'll do, in the blaming, okay? So I think the one we're going to work on today is the one called being right. So in this continuation, now keep in mind that what I'm trying to do primarily is to acquaint you with these. I can't go too much into depth with them, but I'd really encourage you to seek out other sources of information. I think I already recommended the book by David Burns on the Feeling Good Handbook. That would be a very, very good place to start. And as I mentioned earlier, I want to reinforce again that our feelings are not caused by other people, by other situations, etc., etc. They're caused by our thinking. And that's why these cognitive distortions are so incredibly important, because in order for us to maintain kind of an emotional balance, we need to eliminate those cognitive distortions. And further, I don't know if any relationship can be effective if it's fraught with cognitive distortions. And as I mentioned earlier, if you don't eliminate those cognitive distortions, there's a real good chance that they're going to get passed on to your children. And then the beat goes on. So as I said today, we're going to, right now, we're going to cover the cognitive distortion of being right. And in this cognitive distortion, you never, quote unquote, overgeneralization, you never make mistakes. You are, another cognitive distortion, always on the defensive. You must continually prove that your point is correct. In this case, opinions rarely change because you have difficulty hearing any new information that contradicts the information that you already have. Well, this kind of makes for lonely relationships because being right is more important than being honest or caring or thoughtful or really hearing another person. Now, I'm going to take it a step further. There are several words, as you know, that I'm going to ask you to give serious thought to eliminating altogether. Okay? Just give some thought to it. Remember, your job here is to take in information, either accept it and operate on it, reject it as of not being relevant to you, or thinking about it. So I'm asking you to just think about these and see what you come up with. All right. So being right. Now, the words that right and wrong, I would ask you to consider eliminating them. And here's why. Because when I have people come into my office, they're very intelligent, well-educated people, and they continue to have disagreements with each other in the context of their relationship. And not only their relationship, but other important relationships as well, with coworkers and with other family members and stuff, all right? So I'd like you to kind of expand it now beyond just a personal relationship. Okay. So here's the problem with right and the problem with wrong. Okay? What happens many times, clients come in, and what I find out is they're not arguing about who is right and who is wrong. What they're arguing about is who is going to be one up and who's going to be one down. One down is not a comfortable place to be, and we will fight to the death not to be wrong. All right? So if we can get rid of that altogether, that might be helpful in relationships. Okay? So the other thing is wrong has some kind of hint of moral connotations with it. Like if I'm right, I'm also righteous. I'm good. I'm here, you're here. But if I'm wrong, I'm evil and bad, etc., etc. So what people end up fighting for is the upper position, to be one up instead of being one down. So what I can ask people to consider is this. In place of those words, think in terms of effective, ineffective, or less effective. So you could tell me that, Ray, what you did it just wasn't very effective. And it's like, really? Well, let's have a discussion about that. Tell me in what ways it could have been more effective. But if you tell me I'm wrong, I might have a much more defensive reaction, because nobody likes to be wrong. Keep in mind, it has moral connotations as well. Wrong equals bad. Wrong equals evil. Wrong equals sinful. Wrong. So there's all those negative connotations that go along with it. So I ask people to consider, if you're having a disagreement with a partner, try really hard not to get into this right and wrong, and try more about, let's talk about what's effective. Let's talk about what's ineffective. Let's talk about what's less effective. Because when you start fighting to be right and to make the other person wrong, that can get to be a real nasty, nasty fight. But if the discussion is about effective, ineffective, less effective, people aren't going to get very emotional about that. They're not going to get very defensive about that. Now, another part of the problem is that people with PTSD and have suffered chronic trauma tend to be hypersensitive to being wrong. To admit that they're wrong is to admit in their mind that they're bad. So I would suggest, again, that you get rid of that altogether. Another problem with being right and being wrong is that, let's see how I can put this. Being wrong feels bad. It's a very negative feeling, and it's hard to admit that you've been wrong. It's not that hard to admit that what you did or what you said or the way you operated wasn't as effective as it might be. And that creates discussion. And discussion can create change. Just being wrong just makes you feel bad. So I would encourage people to just think of a different way of communicating that. Okay. Let's see. Did I cover enough about that? I think not, but we'll leave it there for now. Okay, now we move on to another cognitive distortion. But before we go any further, I'd like to talk to you about something about guilt. And this is something for sure I want you to think about, all right? There are many people that have suffered child abuse and other forms of maltreatment or trauma, and they end up feeling a lot of guilt over it. It's like somehow the offender has offloaded responsibility for the offense in some way onto the victim. And so they feel bad or less than. So the thing about that's tricky about guilt is I think there's such a thing as rational guilt. Like for Vietnam veterans, we probably did a lot of things that guilt is appropriate for. But a lot of times there's irrational guilt too. So let me talk to you about irrational guilt. These are my thoughts. That's what I want you to think about. I think guilt has to do with intention. I think that guilt is appropriate when we have caused harm or damage to any living creature, and that was our intention. Our intention was to harm them or to hurt them in some way. Now, if I run into your car accidentally, I'll probably feel regret and remorse. And that would be an appropriate feeling because I've damaged your car, I've inconvenienced you, you have to take it to the body shop, it's a real pain in the ass, right? But guilt would not be appropriate in that situation. If I felt guilt about that, it would be non-rational. All right. So if I see your car parked on the street and I go, that's Billy's car, and I really don't like Billy, I'm going to smash into his car on purpose. Boom! And I smash into your car. Now, guilt in that case would be appropriate because it was my intention to cause harm to you. You get it? Now, regret and remorse are much easier burdens to bear. I regret that I ran into your car, and I feel sad about it. Regret and remorse. But most people go right to guilt, and what we label, we feel. So if I label something that I should again be guilty for, then I'm going to feel and experience guilt and feel like I'm wrong and bad, when in fact I feel regret and remorse. So I would just ask you to consider that. And whenever you're feeling guilty about something, ask yourself, does it fall into the category of my intent being to cause injury or damage to another living thing? And if the answer is no, then regret might be more appropriate, and remorse. Now, there's a real catch in there, though, because very often people, let's say, abuse children. Well, they do it believing they're not causing any harm, and that's pretty much why they don't feel guilty about it while they're doing it, because they've convinced themselves that, in many cases, it's good for them. They need to learn about sex, and the sooner they learn about it, all kinds of rationalizations. So that's why it's kind of a slippery slope, and I think we need to be careful with it. But I still think that regret and remorse are much easier burdens to carry than to carry guilt. And then keep in mind, don't forget that guilt is going to come primarily, almost exclusively, from a should. I should be doing that for them. I should not have been doing this. And so that's where the should comes in, adding on to the guilt. All right? So we'll stop on that one, and we'll go to the next one, which is overgeneralization.